A white woman gives birth to black quadruplets, but a late discovery changes everything. Lucas, Mason, Ethan, and Thomas were four tiny babies, all tucked together in their small crib. Their little fists were clenched tight, and their soft breathing made their mom, Clara, feel a little calm. She loved watching them sleep. For a moment, it felt like everything was okay. But deep down, Clara knew things were far from okay. The months leading up to their birth had been very hard for her. Carrying four babies at once made her tired all the time. But it wasn't just her body that hurt. Her heart felt heavy too. She had thought the hardest part was behind her now that the babies were born. But she was wrong. The real trouble started when Daniel, the baby's father, came into the hospital room. Clara had hoped he would be happy to see his children, but instead, he looked cold and distant, like he didn't even know them. His eyes barely glanced at the babies. "I can't do this, Clara," Daniel said, standing stiffly by the door. His voice sounded strange, like he was confused or scared. Clara frowned, confused. "What do you mean, Daniel? What's wrong?" Daniel shook his head. They don't even look like me." Clara's heart sank. "What are you saying, Daniel? Of course, they're your children." Before Daniel could say anything else, his mom, Dolores, walked into the room. Clara didn't like Dolores very much. She was always mean and acted like Clara wasn't good enough for her son. Dolores crossed her arms and smirked. "That's right, Daniel. Look at those babies. They don't look like anyone in our family." Clara felt her hands shake. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Dolores, these are your grandchildren," she said firmly. But Dolores just laughed, a cold, mean laugh. "My grandchildren? Don't make me laugh, Clara. My son doesn't have to take care of kids that clearly aren't his." Clara looked at Daniel, hoping he wouldn't listen to his mother. "Daniel, please," she begged. "These are your children. Don't let her poison your mind." For a moment, Daniel's face softened. Clara thought he might change his mind, but then he looked away as if he couldn't face her. "I can't do this," he said quietly. "I can't be a father to kids I don't believe are mine." And with that, he walked out of the room. Dolores followed him, giving Clara one last mean look before she left. Clara sat there, stunned. Her heart felt broken into tiny pieces. She was all alone now, with four little babies who needed her for everything. When Clara brought her babies home, she had to adjust to a new life. She lived in a tiny apartment, just big enough for her and the babies. There wasn't any space for pretty decorations or nice furniture. The apartment only had what the babies needed: a crib, bottles, and a small pile of clothes. The nights were the hardest. The babies seemed to take turns crying. When one started, the others quickly joined in, filling the small apartment with noise. Clara barely got any sleep. As soon as she managed to calm one baby down, another would wake up crying. One night, Clara was so tired she felt like she might fall apart. She sat in an old chair next to the baby's crib, watching them sleep. Even though they looked so peaceful, Clara felt Dolores's cruel words running through her mind. She tried to push them away. "These are Daniel's children," she whispered to herself, "no matter what anyone says." Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Startled, Clara got up and opened it. Standing there was her neighbor, Ramona. Ramona was an older woman who lived next door. She often smiled kindly at Clara in the hallway, but had never come over before. "Hello, Clara," Ramona said softly. "I heard the babies crying and thought you might need some help." Clara hesitated. She wanted to be strong and handle everything on her own, but she was so tired, and Ramona's kind smile made her feel safe. "Thank you, Ramona," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I could really use some help." Ramona walked inside and picked up one of the babies. She started singing a soft lullaby while rocking him gently. Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel so alone. "Life can be very hard, dear," Ramona said, stroking the baby's tiny head. "But no mother should have to do it all by herself. I'm here to help you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Since Daniel had left, Nobody had been kind to her, but now, with Ramona by her side, she felt a little stronger. As the weeks went by, Clara learned to handle her new life. It wasn't easy, but every time she looked at her babies, she felt a spark of strength. She knew she had to keep going for their sake. To support her family, Clara got a job at a hospital as a nursing assistant. It didn't pay much, but it helped her buy the basics like diapers and formula. The job was hard, and some of her coworkers weren't very nice. Clara often overheard them whispering about her. "Did you hear Clara has 4 babies?" one nurse said. "The dad just walked out on her. Maybe he left because the kids don't look like him," another nurse whispered with a smirk. Clara heard their mean words but didn't say anything. She knew it wouldn't help to argue. She just kept her head down and focused on her work. One doctor at the hospital, Mark, was different. He noticed how hard Clara worked and how tired she always looked. One day, after a long shift, he called her into his office. "Clara, are you okay?" Mark asked, his voice gentle. "You look very tired." Clara tried to smile. "I'm fine," she said, though it wasn't true. Mark shook his head. "If you ever need help or just someone to talk to, I'm here," he said kindly. Clara felt her heart soften. She wasn't used to anyone caring about her. For a moment, she wanted to cry, but she held back. "Thank you," she said quietly. Even though Mark was kind, the gossip at the hospital didn't stop. One day, a nurse approached Clara directly. "Clara, is it true you have 4 kids?" she asked, pretending to be surprised. Clara nodded. "Yes, I do," she said simply. "Wow, that must be so hard," the nurse continued, "especially without a father to help. People are talking, you know." Clara took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She looked at the nurse and said firmly, "My children have everything they need with me." The nurse didn't say anything else and walked away. Clara felt proud of herself for standing her ground. No matter what anyone said, Clara knew one thing for sure. Her children were her whole world, and she would always be there for them. Even if Daniel never came back, she would never let her babies feel unloved or unwanted. They had her, and that was enough. At the hospital, Clara worked long hours as a nurse. She loved helping people, but it wasn't always easy. One day, a nurse she worked with looked at her with a disappointed face. She sighed loudly and walked away, leaving Clara standing there, feeling sad. Clara didn't say anything, but her heart felt heavy. People at the hospital didn't see Clara as a hardworking mother who was doing her best for her kids. Instead, they whispered about her behind her back. They judged her without knowing the truth. Clara felt like she couldn't trust anyone. She always kept her feelings to herself. After her long shift, Clara headed home. Her apartment was small, but it was a place she had managed to keep for her and her children. When she opened the door, her 4 kids were waiting for her. They looked up at her with hungry eyes, restless and excited to see their mom. Even though Clara was exhausted, she smiled at them with so much love. She quickly put her bag down and began taking care of them. For Clara, the moments with her children were the best part of her day. It didn't matter how tired she was or what people at work thought of her. When she was with her kids, it was like the rest of the world disappeared. Their love was her shield, protecting her from the hurtful words and judgment of others. As she fed her children, Clara's mind wandered back to something Mark, one of her coworkers, had said. He was always kind to her and had recently offered to help. "If you ever need anything, just let me know," he had said with a warm smile. Clara wasn't used to people being kind to her. After all, her ex-husband, Daniel, had left her and their kids, making her feel abandoned and alone. It wasn't easy for her to trust anyone, even someone as kind as Mark. She didn't want to depend on anyone or feel like a burden. Still, there was something about Mark that made her feel like she could trust him. At work, Clara stayed busy. Helping patients made her feel a little better, even if just for a moment. Every time she eased someone's pain or brought comfort to them, her own problems felt smaller. Mark noticed how hard Clara worked. He admired her strength and her dedication. Without saying much, he started doing little things to show her he cared. Sometimes he left her a warm cup of coffee in the locker room. Other times he said encouraging words before a tough shift. His small gestures reminded Clara that she wasn't completely alone. One day, after a long shift, Mark caught up with Clara as she was leaving the hospital. "Clara," he said, his voice kind, "I know life isn't always easy. If you ever need help, even just a little, please don't hesitate to ask me. Life's hard enough. We don't have to face it alone." Clara was touched by his words. They made her feel warm inside, like someone truly cared. But instead of opening up, she gave him a small smile and said goodbye. She wasn't ready to let anyone in. She had built walls around her heart to keep from getting hurt again. At home that night, Clara looked at her children as they slept. She felt a wave of love and determination. She promised herself that no matter how hard things got, she would keep going for them. She would always protect them and make sure they had what they needed. While Clara worked hard to build a life for her family, Daniel's life was falling apart. Daniel was Clara's ex-husband and the father of her kids. When things got tough, he had left Clara and their children, running away from his responsibilities. Daniel spent his nights in casinos gambling his money away. He hoped he could win big and escape his problems, but most of the time, he just lost. His mother, Dolores, gave him money every month, but it came with a price. Dolores was a strict, controlling woman who constantly reminded Daniel that he was nothing without her. Daniel hated how his mother controlled him, but he didn't want to take responsibility for his children either. He chose to stay in his comfort zone, even though it wasn't really comfortable. One night, Daniel made a big bet at the casino. He lost everything his mother had given him that month. With no money and nowhere to go, Daniel returned to Dolores's house, hoping she would help him again. But Dolores had had enough. "I can't keep supporting you if you waste everything I give you," she shouted. "You're out of this house." Daniel was shocked. He never thought his own mother would turn her back on him. But Dolores was serious. She crossed her arms and gave him a look that said there was no changing her mind. With no other choice, Daniel left. He wandered the streets, feeling lost and angry. He spent his first night sleeping on a bench in the park. The cold wind blew through his thin jacket, reminding him that he no longer had a home. Over the next few days, Daniel begged for money outside restaurants and bars. He felt humiliated as people either ignored him or gave him pitying looks. Every coin he collected was a reminder of how far he had fallen. Sometimes, Daniel thought about Clara and the kids. He imagined going back to them, asking for forgiveness. But his pride held him back. He didn't want to show weakness or admit he had made a mistake. Meanwhile, years were passing, and Clara's children were growing up. They weren't little kids anymore. They were becoming strong and capable young men. Lucas, the oldest, loved fixing things and figuring out how they worked. He became an engineer, and Clara was so proud of him. Mason, the second oldest, had a strong sense of justice. He decided to study law because he wanted to help people and make sure the world was fair. Ethan, the third brother, wanted to be a doctor. He had always been curious about Clara's work at the hospital and loved helping others. Finally, there was Thomas, the youngest. Thomas loved reading and writing stories. He decided to become a teacher so he could inspire and guide others. Clara watched her boys with pride. They had grown into kind and hardworking young men, and she knew her sacrifices had been worth it. Even though the boys didn't talk about Daniel much, his absence had left a mark on them. They knew he had chosen to leave instead of staying and being a father. They had seen their mom struggle to take care of them on her own, and they admired her strength. One afternoon, the four brothers were sitting in the living room of the house they shared with Clara. Mason, who was always the most direct, brought up the topic that everyone avoided. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked. The room went silent. Ethan looked down at his hands. Lucas let out a deep sigh. Thomas froze, unsure of what to say. They all knew who Mason meant. He was talking about their dad, Daniel. Even though they didn't talk about him often, the memory of their father was still there, like a shadow in the back of their minds. "Why should I think about someone who was never there?" Lucas said softly. He tried to hide how upset he felt. "It's not worth it." "Sometimes I wonder," Ethan said quietly, "what would have been different? I know Mom gave us everything, and we never missed anything, but I still think about how life would have been if he was around." Mason shook his head, looking serious. "That's exactly what he wanted, to leave us with questions and doubts. But he doesn't deserve our thoughts. We're who we are because of Mom, not him." Thomas stayed quiet. He watched his brothers talk, feeling sad, but also calm. Even though they had moved on, the hurt from Daniel not being in their lives was still there, deep inside their hearts. Just then, their mom, Clara, walked into the room. She saw them all together and noticed the serious mood right away. With her usual gentle smile, she sat down beside them. Her eyes were kind, but serious. "My children," she said softly, "I know you have questions about your father. I won't tell you how to feel, but I need you to know something. What he did, leaving us, has nothing to do with you. That was his choice, and it doesn't define who you are." Lucas looked at her, his throat tight with emotion. "But Mom, didn't it hurt you? Didn't you ever wish he would come back?" Clara let out a small sigh, thinking before she answered. "Of course it hurt," she said. "And yes, I wish things had been different. But over time, I realized that his absence was better than a presence that wouldn't have helped us. I was hurt for you, for what you missed without him. But that didn't change my love for you or my goal to raise you well." Mason clenched his fist. His eyes were filled with both anger and respect. "I'll never forgive him," he said. "He left us. He left you. He doesn't deserve anything." Clara's voice turned strong. "You're right, Mason. I don't owe him anything, not even anger. Letting go is the only way to heal. If there's one thing I want for you, it's to live without that burden." Her words stayed in the air, and even though the brothers understood what she meant, the pain didn't just disappear. It was like a scar they couldn't fully forget. As the boys went off to their own activities, Clara sat in the living room, thinking about the empty space Daniel had left behind. She wondered if he would ever be brave enough to face the family he had walked away from. She knew her children were strong and had made their own paths, but she couldn't help but feel sorry for what Daniel had lost. Later that day, the quadruplets, Lucas, Ethan, Mason, and Thomas, went for a walk downtown like they often did. They liked to spend time together, sharing stories and laughs. No matter how busy they were, they always made time for each other. The streets were filled with people, and musicians played cheerful tunes. It reminded them of when their mom used to take them downtown as kids, holding their hands and showing them the world, no matter how hard things were. Suddenly, Ethan stopped. He stared at a man sitting by the entrance of a closed shop. The man had a guitar, but its strings were loose. His clothes were dirty, his skin was sunburned, and he looked tired and sad. Ethan nudged Lucas and pointed at the man. At first, Lucas didn't understand, but then, little by little, the man's face looked familiar. His dark hair was now gray, and his beard was messy. But it was him, Daniel, the father who had left them long ago. Mason and Thomas came closer, too. They recognized him and felt old feelings of hurt and anger rise up. But they didn't walk away. They stood still, staring at him, trying to understand how this man in front of them could be their dad. Lucas, the oldest, stepped forward first. He walked up to Daniel, his hands stretched out, showing no anger. Daniel looked at the hand, his face filled with surprise and shame. He hesitated but didn't pull away. His hand shook as he reached out. "Hello, Daniel," Lucas said calmly. "I'm Lucas. We're your children." Daniel's face turned red, and his hands trembled more. He looked down, not meeting their eyes. I don't know what to say, he muttered. You don't have to say anything, Ethan said, walking up beside Lucas. We just wanted to see you, to know if you're okay. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. Okay? I don't even know what that word means anymore, he said, staring at the ground. Thomas, who was the gentlest, stepped closer. His voice was soft but firm. We're not here to blame you, Daniel. We just want to understand. We grew up without you, and we got used to that, but we think everyone deserves a chance to face their past. Daniel finally looked up at them. Their words surprised him. He never thought he'd see them again, let alone hear such kindness. Mason, who had been quiet, crossed his arms and spoke firmly. We're not asking for anything. We don't want apologies or excuses. We just want to know for sure. Are you really our father? We want proof, not just words. Daniel looked startled. You want a DNA test? He asked, his voice shaking. Exactly, Mason said firmly. Not because we don't know who we are, but because we need to end the questions. Daniel hesitated. He felt trapped, but he also realized he had nothing to lose. Slowly, he nodded. The quadruplets arranged for a DNA test at a nearby lab. While they waited for the results, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about what they would say. He remembered his own mother, Dolores, telling him cruelly that the children weren't his. He had believed her and left. Now, he was about to face the truth. When the results came back, the quadruplets and Daniel gathered in the same place where they had first met. Lucas opened the envelope, read the paper, and looked up at Daniel. You are our father, he said simply. Daniel felt the weight of those words. Every excuse he had told himself disappeared. He had abandoned his family because of a lie he had chosen to believe to avoid responsibility. I can't change what I did, Daniel said, his voice breaking. I can't erase all those years or the pain I caused. Ethan put a hand on his shoulder. We're not asking you to fix the past, he said gently. We just wanted to understand. What you do now is your choice. Daniel couldn't meet their eyes. He knew they didn't expect him to suddenly become their dad, but their kindness gave him something he hadn't felt in years, a small chance to start over. Daniel had made a lot of mistakes in his life. He had hurt his family by leaving them, choosing bad habits, and making decisions that tore apart his relationships with the people he loved. For years, he thought there was no way to fix things. His guilt and shame weighed heavily on him, and he felt like there was no coming back from what he had done. But one day, everything changed. Daniel had ended up on the streets. He was lost, exhausted, and alone. It was a cold night when his 4 sons found him. They hadn't seen him in a long time, and yet they didn't yell at him or tell him how bad he had been. Instead, they showed him something he never expected: kindness, respect, and understanding. Mason, one of his sons, was the first to speak. He stood there for a moment, looking at his father with quiet seriousness. Then, in a voice that was calm yet firm, he said, Our mother never spoke badly about you. She always taught us to move forward, no matter what happened, and without holding grudges. If we're here today, it's because of her. She taught us to forgive. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had always thought his sons would hate him for the way he had treated them, for abandoning them when they needed him most. But instead, here they were, offering him something far more important than anger: understanding. His heart was heavy with emotion. I don't know how I deserve this, Daniel said, his voice breaking. I don't know if I can make things right. Lucas, the oldest son, stepped closer. He had always been the most responsible of the 4. His words were gentle, but they carried a deep sincerity. Maybe you can start by forgiving yourself. We're here for you, Dad. Not because we want anything from you, but because we care. We just want you to know that we're here, and we're not asking for anything else. Daniel looked at his sons. Each of them had their own life, their own struggles. Yet here they were, standing by him, offering him a chance he hadn't even known he wanted. Slowly, one by one, the brothers said goodbye to Daniel. Each of them shared a look with him, a look of silent understanding, respect, and acceptance. It wasn't easy for any of them, but they were willing to give their father another chance. As Daniel watched them leave, a strange mixture of sadness and hope filled his heart. He had missed so many years with them, and yet here they were, treating him with the love and respect that he didn't feel he deserved. He realized that the true strength of his children came from their mother, Clara. She had given them the love and the strength to grow into the amazing men they were, even though Daniel had been absent for most of their lives. The next week, Ethan, one of his sons, helped Daniel move into a small, simple apartment. It wasn't much, but it was clean and safe, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he had a place to call home. It was strange, though, being surrounded by his sons, especially since he barely knew them anymore. It felt like a dream that he wasn't sure he deserved. Ethan was the first to act. He was determined to get Daniel the medical help he needed. "Dad, you can't keep living like this. You need to see a doctor. You've been ignoring your health and you need treatment for your addiction. You can't keep running away from this. Life gave you a second chance, and I'm not going to let you waste it," Ethan said firmly. Daniel wasn't sure how to react. He hadn't expected any of this, especially not from his children. But something in Ethan's voice made him stop and think. Maybe it was time to face the things he had been running from. So slowly but surely, Daniel agreed to go to the doctor to get help for both his health problems and his addiction. Ethan arranged for Daniel to see a specialist who could help him understand and fight the addiction that had been controlling his life for so many years. Mason, another son, took on the task of helping Daniel with his finances. Daniel had accumulated a mountain of debt over the years, and now it was time to face it. One day, Mason came to the apartment with a stack of papers and documents. "This is going to be tough, Dad, but it's not impossible," he said, sitting down next to Daniel. "We need to go through all these receipts and bills. It's going to take time, but we'll figure it out. For now, we'll focus on the urgent things." Daniel felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had never imagined that his children would be the ones to help him pay off his mistakes. Yet, here they were, not judging him, not blaming him, but offering him their help and support. It filled him with a deep sense of gratitude and humiliation at the same time. The first few weeks of recovery were the hardest. Daniel's body trembled with the withdrawal from alcohol, and his mind was filled with anxieties that he had long buried. But through it all, Ethan never left his side. He took Daniel to every doctor's appointment, made sure he followed the therapist's instructions, and reminded him every day that recovery was a long process, but one worth fighting for. "This isn't easy, Dad," Ethan said one evening as they sat together. "But don't expect everything to change overnight. Trust me, though, every day you stay sober is a victory. You just have to take it one day at a time." At first, Daniel struggled to believe that he could stay sober for long, but Ethan's steady encouragement and unwavering support started to give him a glimmer of hope. Slowly, Daniel began to trust the process, and with each small step forward, he felt like he was slowly getting his life back. Lucas, the eldest, also supported Daniel in his own way. Even when he was busy with his work, Lucas made sure to check in on his dad. He brought him food, encouraged him to eat well, and sometimes stayed to talk with him. They would share simple dinners, and during these quiet moments, Lucas would talk to Daniel about the past. "It's easy to fall, Dad," Lucas said one night, his voice low but kind. "But what's hard is climbing back up. You've got to be strong, and we're here to help you do that. You don't have to do it alone." Lucas's words stuck with Daniel. He had spent so many years trying to hide from his mistakes, trying to escape the shame and guilt. But now he had a chance to face it, and his children were giving him the courage to do it. Liam, the youngest son, also played a special role in Daniel's recovery. Liam was the most sensitive of the four, and he had a deep understanding of his father's pain. He often brought Daniel books and magazines, encouraging him to find peace through reading. One day, Liam handed his father a book of poems. "Dad," he said softly, "we all make mistakes, but what's important is learning from them. You're not alone anymore, and that's what matters." Liam's kindness made Daniel realize that family wasn't just about blood. It was about supporting each other, no matter what. And for the first time in his life, Daniel understood what real love felt like. As the months passed, Daniel began to see things differently. He wasn't alone anymore. His sons had shown him the love and support he had never given them. He realized that he had been so focused on his own mistakes that he had never truly understood the power of family. His sons, with their patience, compassion, and strength, had taught him more than he could ever have imagined. Finally, one day, Daniel felt strong enough to say what he had been holding inside for so long. He gathered his four sons in the small apartment, and with tears in his eyes, he spoke. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to make up for everything I've done, but I want you to know that if I'm here today, it's because of you. You've given me a chance, and I want to be the father I never was. If you'll let me, I want to try." The four sons sat in silence, their emotions mixed. The past had left scars that might never fully heal, but deep down, each of them shared the same hope, that their father could be redeemed. They understood that redemption wasn't about perfection, it was about choosing to be better, day by day. Not long after, they decided to solve a family mystery. They had always wondered why they looked so different from each other and why some of their traits seemed so unusual. After taking a DNA test, they learned that Daniel was indeed their biological father. But the mystery wasn't over. Why did they have such different features? Clara, their mother, decided to dig deeper into their family history. At first, she hesitated, unsure if they would find anything. But when they started going through old documents and photographs, they uncovered something surprising. Clara's maternal grandfather had come from West Africa. When Clara shared this discovery with her children, they were shocked, but also felt a sense of peace. The unique traits they had inherited were part of their family's history. It was a part of who they were, and understanding this gave them a sense of closure they had been searching for. Daniel had spent so many years feeling like an outsider in his own family, but now he felt more connected to them than ever. He realized that family wasn't about being perfect. It was about love, patience, and the willingness to be there for each other. And for the first time, Daniel felt like he could be the father his sons had always deserved. Ethan was the first to speak, his voice filled with surprise. "So it's because of Grandpa that we have these traits no one ever understood," he said, looking at his brothers, who also seemed shocked by the news. "It's amazing, Mom," Lucas said. "For so many years, everyone thought the worst, but the answer was always in our family's past." Mason, always serious, added, "This is really important, Mom. I think it's time Daniel knows the truth. Maybe it will help him understand what his actions did to us." Clara agreed. She knew that even though the past couldn't be changed, this new discovery was a chance to heal. She decided to call Daniel and invite him to their apartment. He agreed to come, not knowing what it was about. When Daniel arrived, Clara felt a mix of emotions. Even though he had hurt her and the kids, she knew this truth was something he needed to hear. It would help him understand how wrong his ideas had been. Clara spoke calmly but firmly, knowing she had carried this burden for so long. "Daniel," Clara began, "your doubts and prejudices pushed you away from us. Today, I want to show you something important." She showed him her grandfather's record, explaining how their family history had caused the traits Daniel had misunderstood. Daniel listened quietly, his face filled with disbelief and regret. "So all this time," he whispered, unable to finish his sentence. The guilt in his voice was clear. "Yes," Clara said. All this time, you and others assumed the worst about me and our children without trying to understand. But your assumptions didn't just hurt me. They hurt our children. They changed the life we could have had as a family. Daniel couldn't look at her. He knew he couldn't justify his actions, but hearing the truth made him feel deeply sad. The years he lost, the pain he caused Clara and their children, all seemed too much to bear now that he understood the harm his prejudices had done. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to make up for all the damage I caused." Clara stayed quiet for a moment, then spoke with calm strength. "Daniel, hatred and prejudice almost destroyed our family, but I chose not to hold on to hatred. I chose to teach our children to forgive and to move on. Not for you, but for them. They deserve to grow up without carrying that weight." Daniel looked at her in surprise, hearing the kindness in her voice despite everything that had happened. She was letting go of the anger and forgiving him. It was a moment of healing for both of them. Their children, who had been silent, each understood that this conversation, although painful, was part of healing. They saw it as a way to close a painful chapter in their lives. Mason was the first to approach his father. He put a hand on Daniel's shoulder and said, "What matters now, Daniel, is that we learn from this. We can't change the past, but we can choose how to live from here on out. For Mom, for us, and even for you." Daniel nodded, feeling like for the first time he had the chance to change and become a better person, not just for his children, but for himself. The truth about his family and their forgiveness helped him see that it was possible to leave the past behind and start fresh. In the days that followed, Daniel began to find his place in the family again. He wasn't the man he had once been, but he was trying to be better. His children noticed. He was no longer the absent father from their childhood, but someone who was changing for the better. Although they had scars from the past, they began to feel a sense of closure and peace. "I can't believe how much he's changed," Ethan said one afternoon while talking with his brothers. Mason agreed. "I never thought we would give him another chance, but seeing him now, I feel like it was worth it. We may never get back the time we lost, but at least we know we did the right thing." Meanwhile, Clara's life was also changing. Mark, the doctor who had always supported her, had been a good friend to her throughout the hard years. She had always admired him, and over time their friendship grew stronger. They started spending time together outside of work, like having coffee or taking walks in the park. Clara began to realize that Mark was someone special. One day, after Mark dropped her off at home, he stayed for a moment and looked at her with warmth. "Clara," he said softly, "I've never told you this, but I really admire you. You've been an incredible mother, a strong woman, and I've learned so much from you." Clara smiled, feeling a warm feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. "Mark, you've been the friend I needed. I don't know how I would have managed without your help." Mark smiled back. "You don't owe me anything, Clara. Everything I did because I wanted to be by your side. And if you ever want to take the next step, I'll be here." Clara felt a mix of emotions. Mark had always been there for her. His words gave her a sense of peace, and she knew it was time to move forward. Later, surrounded by her family and friends, Clara raised a glass to love and forgiveness. She toasts to her family, the people who had supported her and helped her find peace. "Today, I close one chapter of my life and open a new one," she said. "I've learned that every step, every sacrifice, and every smile has brought me here, to peace." The family cheered, knowing that although the past couldn't be erased, it had been healed. Clara knew she had made it to a place of peace she had never imagined. In the years that followed, Clara enjoyed a peaceful life, supported by Mark and surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her children had grown up strong and loving, and Clara was proud of them. She had raised them with love, and now they were raising their own families with the same care. Daniel, too, had changed. He had struggled with his addictions for years, but with the support of his children, he managed to stay sober and live a peaceful life. Though he lived far from his children, their relationship was strong. Daniel worked simple jobs and lived humbly, but he was grateful for the second chance he had been given. Clara, now a grandmother, watched her grandchildren play and smiled. She felt fulfilled knowing that all her struggles had led to this moment, a peaceful, happy family. One day, while holding her newborn granddaughter Lucas, the oldest of the quadruplets came up to her. "Mom," he said, hugging her, "thank you for everything. For being strong, for teaching us that there's always a way forward, and for never giving up. We are who we are because of you." Clara smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "You all gave me the reason to fight. You made me strong. And now I see that everything I did had a purpose. I have a united family filled with love. That's more than I ever dreamed of." The whole family gathered around Clara, hugging her. They knew this moment was a testament to everything they had overcome together. Daniel, though not directly part of this scene, felt thankful for the forgiveness his children had given him. He knew that he would never let fear or selfishness control him again. Clara, with Mark by her side, had found peace. It was a peace she had earned with every sacrifice and every act of love. And now, surrounded by her family, she knew that love and forgiveness had healed the wounds of the past, and she had built a future full of happiness. Thank you for watching. If you like this story and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. That way you won't miss any new videos. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share what you think in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel. We'll see you in the next story.